And when I woke up this morning, I was feeling pretty dangerous.
And if we're talking tight ends and we're going into round 2, maybe round 3, give me Ian Thomas, please. Let's just do the damn thing.
Just based on giving his overall ability. Again, I like his arm. I think he can make every throw.
The pick at number 12 is in.
And we're back for another edition of Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast. I'm Russell Brown, as always, on the other side of the glass. CP, Christian Page, my man, how we doing?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, man, I'm doing great. Tomorrow's Friday. I don't have to do any work stuff outside of football on Saturday and Sunday, so I'm going to get comfortable, get ready for Thanksgiving next week, which we kind of have to discuss off the air what we want to do for next week with the holiday coming in. But it's a great time. I mean, it's football full on right now. We were just looking at the schedule for week 13 of college football. Not a great slate of college games. I mean, tonight, NC State at Georgia Tech. I'd be excited if Ryan Finley was playing, but he's not. He's just sucking it up for the Cincinnati Bengals. So obviously the big game is Penn State, Ohio State. We'll talk about some of the games that are on schedule and on tap for the weekend, and we'll get into some prospects that we've watched over the weekend. We'll also talk about some of the East-West Shrine Game invites that have been happening, the Senior Bowl. But the big news for the NFL draft, for the 2020 NFL draft, was the injury to Tua, the Alabama quarterback, over the weekend. We all know about Tua. We all know how talented he is. And this is an injury that was not anything from previous injuries like an ankle or a knee or anything like that. It was a hip injury where he dislocated his hip. He's had successful surgery on it now, but he's looking at a long timeline until he will be right. But what was your initial thought on the injury? What was your initial thought just through the entire process over the last couple of days? And where do we think we go on Tua as a prospect moving forward?
I think the obvious first thought is, why was he in the game at that point? But then again, I see both sides. So I wish I could have, a hardcore 100% opinion. But I do see the value on both sides because, if you think about it, Tua in Alabama in general, outside of the LSU game, even though he was banged up, have not really been in a certain 2-minute drill situation. So maybe that was kind of just a test. Nick Saban's like, hey, Tua, finish this drive. You may put 3 points, put a touchdown on the board, and then we may play you one more drive in the first drive of the third quarter, and then your day's going to be done. Mm-hmm. Now, and judging that from Nick Saban's side and putting, in his perspective, if Tua's cleared by the doctors, then by all means, that means he should be ready to go. And there shouldn't be really much of a worry with your decision to play him, even in a situation where it's a 30-point game. Now, of course, the other side, even though Tua is cleared 100% to play, his chronic ankle injuries, both ankles, not just one, both of them. And so, do you rest him, especially when you go up quickly 14-0, and then, they're quickly putting points on the board, this, that, and the other, and you just kind of see the writing on the wall. I mean, if you watch an Alabama game, especially an early afternoon game, those games are over a quarter in. And so we saw the writing on the wall that this game was going to be a blowout. And then you look at that with the ankle situation that Tua's had in the past, and he just didn't look right in that LSU game. Looked a little more comfortable in this Mississippi State game. But going forward, then you ask the question, well, why was he in? You got Auburn coming up. You have potentially a playoff or a big-time bowl game. You have his NFL draft status on the line, if that's a thought that popped in Coach Saban's head. So there's a lot of things to factor in, and I think there's more maybe I don't know what the right word is, more opinions on the reason why he shouldn't have been playing as opposed to the other end of the fence. I'm not going to go all in and say it was a wrong decision for him to be in, but I definitely understand the concerns. I'll let you comment on that, and then we'll hop back into what it means from a draft evaluation.
Yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things where it's like you're playing Mississippi State, and I know it's Mississippi State. At any given time, they can, score a touchdown. At any given time, they can make a stop. I mean, they are a legitimate team. It's not like it's this weekend where they're playing Western Carolina, but at the same time, like, I don't believe he should have been in the game. But just from everything, I mean, it's so unfortunate. And we talked about it before. We talked about Joe Burrow and Tua last week after the LSU Bama game, and we talked about how that game was so important for both players, and how important it was for Tua to show that, hey, even though he's 2 weeks removed from an ankle surgery, he's back on the field. He's showing that he can play. He's showing that toughness. But we talked about how he has had these injuries in the past, and how and I know I definitely said it because I said it on the radio shows that I do every week, and it was, he's going to flare up on this injury eventually down the line, because those lower body injuries tend to flare up. And that's what I was afraid was going to happen either in this game against LSU, or in the game against LSU, or against Mississippi State, or even against a team like West Carolina, where it just didn't really matter. But this was totally off the wall. And now, like, just looking at it from a, let's say a year rehab standpoint, or however long the rehab's going to be for him, really just for him to get back to being the quarterback that he was before the injury. I just don't know if he's ever going to get to that level, man. Like I said, the lower body injuries tend to reoccur. Those are going to flare back up, because now he's going to overcompensate. I believe it was his left hip, if I remember correctly, that he just dislocated, correct? Or was it? So he dislocates that. He just got done having surgery on his right ankle. He's already had surgery on the other one. He's already been dealing with those injuries. He's now going to overcompensate the hip. And I have a feeling down the line he's going to end up re-injuring that ankle or that right leg. And I have a hard time really buying into, if I'm a franchise, I'm going to draft this guy now, because if you're a team that is looking 10 years down the line and you draft him, sure, it might pay off, but it's a big if. And if you're a team like Miami, they make sense because they have a plethora of first-round picks. But if you're a team like, let's say, the Bengals, and you take Tua at 1 over Joe Burrow, or if you trade back and you get Tua, I just don't know, man. Like, I don't know where your head's at as far as where we're viewing him as, like, we know where he is as a draft prospect, but overall stock and value and just the long-term effects of this injury, I just don't know where it's gonna pan out.
It's a tough evaluation. And me personally, like, I'm not really looking to drafting him whatsoever. I mean, there's too many things. I mean, talent-wise, there's enough there. He doesn't have many inabilities on the field. I know he struggles a little bit against upper competition. He struggles a little bit when he has to come off his second read. But you can pretty much say the same thing about every quarterback in this class. Mm-hmm. So that's not really a glaring red flag. I think you can build on that with, competition and good coaching at the next level. But the injuries continue. Like you said, the lower body injuries where, in your rehabilitation process, yeah, sure, you injured your hip, but you still have those ankle injuries. And that's just, it may throw off your base. It may throw off your overall mechanics. And do you ever get back to 100% like you're saying? And even though there might be a team out there that is 100% patient with him, they don't mind kind of taking the risk on him. But one, I don't know what value there is in drafting him anywhere in the first round now, because I don't feel comfortable saying, oh, that's a value pick. But like you said, maybe Miami's second or third pick, that could be a possibility. But with some quarterbacks in this class, you got the physical talent of Jacob Eason, but he lacks the consistency. Justin Herbert might move up to that second spot now. I think we both agree that Joe Burrow is a strong candidate to be that number 1 overall pick if it is Cincinnati. But then you got, a lot of physical intrigue and athleticism from guys like Jordan Love. Sure, he's not as consistent as a Tua Tagovailoa, but there's a lot of intrigue there. If I'm an organization, even though I don't know if this is really a comparable situation, it kind of is, but with Robert Griffin III was drafted by the Washington Redskins. He was coming off an ACL injury, but we saw how he overcame that in college at Baylor. Mm-hmm. But then, of course, we all know the story. A few rounds later, they draft Kirk Cousins, a very capable quarterback, and we know how he's one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the league now, and he's having a really solid season over the past few weeks. So maybe there's a situation where you kind of compensate or supplement the Tua draft pick if you do get him in the first round, which you're still going to have to pick him in the first round unless he just entirely hangs it up or there's some consistent issue where he's just not getting better. Maybe you do compensate for that and draft a quarterback in those third, fourth round. I don't know who that is. I don't have a list of names in front of me, and I don't think this quarterback class is really deep, but maybe, if I go back, 5-6 years, or I guess 2012 it was, maybe I felt the same way about that quarterback class, and I didn't really believe in Kirk Cousins, and look where he is now. Look where RG3 is now. So I think you have to have a very strong plan where you don't really look like you have egg on your face at the end of the day, because all the warning signs are there for Tua to, I don't want to say bust, but possibly to fail or just never get that opportunity to be a starting quarterback with 100% capability because of his injury history. It's a decision that I'm glad I don't have to make, but because somebody could really lose their job over that. And if that's a hill and a table you're really willing to stand on, then so be it. But it's going to be really, really tough. And you just hate to see it. Just from a human element, you hate to see it to a really special guy and player like Tua.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like you mentioned, you wouldn't take him in the first round. If I'm in a room, I'm probably taking him in the first round. But I think what you're saying is, like, if you're a team in the top 10, you wouldn't take him in the first round. And I agree with you there. But if you're not, and let's say you are Carolina, let's say you are Tennessee, for example. And I would like to get your take on that because you are a Titans fan. But even if, like, I don't know, let's say Green Bay, let's say New England, I don't know, one of these teams that have veteran quarterbacks. I mean, we talk about Tom Brady all the time. When's he going to hang it up? I know they have Jarrett Stidham, but if you were sitting there in the late 20s or early 30s and you're able to get Tua, I feel like if you're the Patriots, you're going to go ahead and pull the trigger on that. If you're Green Bay, you're probably going to do the same thing. And like Tennessee, they have Ryan Tannehill. They're going to move on from Marcus Mariota, but they have Ryan Tannehill. They're going to be sitting in the middle there if he's there, because I think he's still going to go in the first round. I still think that. So I want to let the people know I think Tua is still going round 1. I don't think he's going to go top 10. He was a top 5 pick going into this year, top 5 pick before this injury. I think he's still a first-round pick. But, like, where do you have him if he was to go to Tennessee? How would you feel as a fan of that team?
One, I'm sure a lot of Titans fans will be maybe a little uneasy of drafting another Hawaiian quarterback. So just getting over the stereotype in that regard. But, I mean, Mariota's had an okay career, but injuries got him, which that would be another concern to make Titans fans uneasy when you already knowingly you're bringing somebody in the organization that does have a chain of injury events. But I think that would be a perfect situation. Ryan Tannehill, sure, he's played really well for Tennessee in these handful of games that he's been there, taking over for Mariota. And he's not good enough to commit to long-term. He is good enough to commit for 2 or 3 years. And I think that's the window that you could have with Tua. And you'll know if he's capable to be that starting quarterback for you in the future in a very winnable division, in my opinion. So maybe I think that would be a really good direction to go into. I mean, if you're looking at a little deeper of the veteran quarterbacks, you're talking about, Tom Brady or potentially, New Orleans, if you want to go that far, depending on the longevity of Drew Brees. You saw the concerns with Phillip Rivers this past Sunday night. Or this past Monday night against the Chiefs. He couldn't put it together, 3-4 interceptions. You can physically see him breaking down a little bit. And I know the guys led the league in interceptions, it seems like, the past 5 years, but I think that's a real question. You have a ton of talent, a ton of young talent. Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry's butting into one of the better tight ends in the league. You got a lot of talent on that offensive side of the roster. So maybe just one more piece and just bridging Tua to that starting role with a veteran quarterback like Phillip Rivers might be a good idea. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Tua, and probably better opportunities, in my opinion, for him to, be patient. No need to rush into your starting position unless he was drafted by a team like Cincinnati, Miami, or another QB-needy team in that 10 to top 12 range. I think there's a lot of patience, which I think would benefit the organization and Tua himself if he has that ability to wait out, not rush into, and potentially re-injure something that he's injured before.
Well, and even just moving forward away from like the aging veteran stereotype or situation, whatever we want to call that, there's teams out there with younger quarterbacks that some are veterans and some quarterbacks that just have had a few years under their belt. They're not very good. And then there's another team that has an aging veteran on their roster that's currently not playing. They have a rookie quarterback that they haven't had a chance to play yet, and he might never even get a shot to play. And that team's Denver. They're picking in the top 10. If Denver's sitting there, we all know John Elway loves quarterbacks. Is that a possibility? It very much could be in the cards. I don't think that they would, but you never know, especially with Elway. You have Tampa Bay. Jameis Winston is I think, done there. And I think Tua with Bruce Arians would be a really good match. You mentioned the Chargers, the Bears with Mitch Trubisky. I think we can all say that's been a failed experiment, and I think they're going to make a move eventually here to consider either moving on from him. There's been rumors possibly Cam Newton going there. As far as the things that I've seen on social media, how truthful those are, I have no idea. Pittsburgh, they don't have a first-round pick, but they would make sense. We just talked about Tennessee. You mentioned the Chargers. Again, back to the Packers, the Patriots. Outside of that, I don't think there's really that many other teams, but that's still, before all that, there's plenty of teams, I think, now that I really look at it, that still, I think, could use this service. And I don't know if it's going to be in the first round because that is a gamble, but it's hard to believe that they wouldn't, because you have, like, if you're the Bears, give Mitch Trubisky one more year, but take Tua now, get him rehabbed, get him ready to go. And then once you know Trubisky's not the guy, because I think the writing is on the wall there, you go ahead and you get, your future franchise guy possibly in Tua, even though I don't think he's going to get that label because of the injury history. But it's going to be such an interesting, just an interesting chain of events for Tua and his draft stock. And really, is he even going to go pro? Will he just stay another year at Bama? Do you think that's a possibility too? I don't think it is. I think he's going pro.
I don't think he needs to go back because, I don't know the timetable for this injury, but I wouldn't expect him to be back week 1 of the 2020 college football season. And what does he really have to benefit? Just to prove that, hey,
Right.
I've overcome this injury and I can still play football at a high level. But what if he comes back and he doesn't play well? And you see some shortcomings with the injuries. And I know, like, NFL teams, if he were to enter the draft, that they would have some of those concerns. By no means am I calling anybody dumb, being like, well, they didn't see his physical limitations. They would spot that out before he even got to the 2020 season. But I think from a personal level, with him still, even though, this is a very tough injury to overcome, it sounds like it's all positive. I mean, you're seeing the positive vibes with him in the hospital room, playing the ukulele and singing and everything like that. He has that positive vibe going into there, and it seems like the timetable is not as bad as we once thought it were to be. Some people compared it very similar to Bo Jackson's career-ending hip injury when he had it with the Oakland Raiders, that of course ruined what could have been a Hall of Fame career for Bo Jackson with the talent he had. But it doesn't sound like it's going to be that what's the right word? That impossible to overcome, I guess I should say. So but I just don't understand if he were to come back, unless it was for degree or a promise or whatever it may be, because you've already won a national championship. You've already won the SEC. You were just a few votes close from getting the Heisman. You don't owe Alabama or Nick Saban anything else. This is your time. It's time just to have Tagovailoa on the back of your jersey and figure out the future from there.
Yep. Go secure the bag, man, because at this rate, if he plays another down for Alabama, I don't see how he gets off the field, because he's, without being put back on a card again at this rate, because it seems like every time he's played now, it's at least like the last 4 or 5 games, he's getting helped off the field. So hopefully that doesn't transition to the NFL where it's a consistent thing every Sunday. But I definitely think he's going to go pro. I think he's going to go out there and definitely try to get, as much money as he possibly can. And we've gone over the teams that make sense. There's, I think, plenty of teams. I don't know what direction you want to go as far as what's next on the show. Do we want to go over the top 10, the recent draft order from this past week, and maybe talk about the top 10 teams and go over what they need to do? Or do you want to focus in on some Senior Bowl stuff, some East-West Shrine Game stuff? I'm letting you make the call.
I'm game. Since we're just talking about situation, we can just continue on the draft and what we think some of the top level teams. Just looking over some of this, we've talked about Cincinnati and Miami. We'll continue to talk about them. I don't think Miami knows, or maybe they just forgot that they're supposed to be tanking. But I guess it kind of worked itself out, I guess, at the expense of Tua's injury maybe, because now it's like, well, we're in position to still draft a guy like Justin Herbert at quarterback. But I would assume right now Cincinnati and Joe Burrow are the marriage right now at 1 overall. But you got teams like Washington, the New York Giants, also the New York Jets there at the bottom as well. Washington, it seems like Dwayne Haskins, it seems like that organization's bought into him going forward. So, best player available, maybe Chase Young right there if Cincinnati were to go number 1 overall to Joe Burrow. Chase Young, or maybe lock up that left side with Trent Williams no longer a member of that football team. Go get Andrew Thomas, the best offensive tackle in this class, in my opinion. And then the New York teams, they got some wounds to mend. I don't think that's something glaring. And New York, I know they've invested some talent, some money into wide receiver, but of course losing Odell Beckham, I think they have to look toward a guy like Jerry Jeudy, or maybe that receiver that they think is the top guy in this draft class. Because, again, helping your quarterback when you've made that investment, like they did with Daniel Jones, just helping build a core around him is definitely the first thing. And maybe that starts with wide receiver. Maybe that starts up front somewhere on the offensive line. But I think just going forward there, I think Jerry Jeudy in New York would be a really good spot.
I think that would be a home run pick for them, especially if Chase Young's off the board, because it does seem to be a very strong tendency for Dave Gettleman to go in the offensive line or defensive line direction. But he needs to go out and get a receiver, because Sterling Shepard, I think, is good as done. I don't know if he's going to play another snap for the Giants, honestly. I mean, he's got bad concussion symptoms. He's still not cleared through that over the last 4 or 5 weeks. So they need to get something else at the wide receiver position. I mean, Darius Slayton's been a very nice find for them. Golden Tate's been a nice investment, but he's only getting older. He's not going to play forever. And Evan Ingram at tight end, when he's healthy, he's okay. But when he's been dinged up over the last 2 seasons. So I think they need to go out and get a receiver. I think it's interesting. You talked about Washington being invested in Dwayne Haskins. I think that they are, but I think we all saw the video that circulated. I don't think their offensive line is bought into him.
Not at all.
What was that about? I mean, how do you, as a young, potential franchise quarterback, a rookie quarterback, how do you even show up to work the next day with that type of reaction, that type of mindset for the guys that are supposed to be protecting you? That blew my mind when I saw that. I mean, like, Brandon Sheriff's a great offensive lineman. I thought for sure he was going to stand up, stand for his quarterback. He just stood there, or he sat there, and he looked left to right at his teammates and didn't say a word. I couldn't believe that. And I don't know. I mean, I think getting a franchise left tackle for them is certainly the way to go. I would not be surprised if Andrew Thomas was the guy, but Chase Young is so good that I think getting him to be next to or across from Ryan Kerrigan for the, I don't want to say the final days of Kerrigan's career, but he's played for 140 consecutive games, and it's a matter of time before he's not going to be playing. So I think getting some future potential to replace him down the line, and also a good pairing, is key, especially when you've got the quarterbacks that are in that division. We've talked about Miami. They've got the ammunition to really do whatever they want in this draft, and I wouldn't be surprised if they took a potential wide receiver like Jerry Jeudy, or a safety like Grant Delpit, or I don't know, another edge rusher that would be in the position to be drafted at that spot, or an offensive lineman like Tristan Wirfs. I think they need help up front. Would make a lot of sense. Atlanta is an interesting team because I think Dan Quinn's done, right? Like he's given up the defensive coordinator duties. Their defense has played lights out the last 2 weeks, but they're not going to make the playoffs. They have to win out if they even want a shot. I don't see that happening. They're 3-7. Maybe they don't pick in this spot. Maybe they do pick in the mid-teens. But at this point, just take the rest of the season, count your losses, and try to get a high draft pick to get something else in here. But Dan Quinn, like I said, I think is good as done, right? Like he's got to be on thin ice, or at least on a hot seat.
Oh, 100%. I mean, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that he's made it this far into the season, because you saw a little bit of I guess, reservation from Arthur Blank, and I'm just making this just based on, some of the reports that we've heard in the past, but I don't know if the commitment's there that it once was with Dan Quinn. And, it's kind of run its course. When you have that veteran-laden quarterback, and even though Matt Ryan was playing very well at the beginning of the year, the team in general wasn't playing that well. The defense was struggling. Like you said, a defensive head coach, and he gave over those duties, and they have played better, but there's still, a lot of shortcomings on that defensive side of the ball. But just from a draft perspective, I still think they need that tier 1 edge rusher that they're still looking for. They invested in Vic Beasley. It hasn't really worked out. Tack McKinley's only okay, but I don't think he's ever going to reach that upper time level that Atlanta really needs if they want to, start its core on the defensive line, going, partnering with Grady Jarrett and whoever else it may be. And I think going forward, they need to address that pass rushing element. Mm-hmm. So whoever that may be, you can throw out a couple names, but I think that's probably where they need to start. And if not there, maybe a best player available situation. They want to shore up some pieces on the offensive line. But Atlanta's kind of one of those teams that it's kind of really hard to circle what they need in order for them to get over that next hump, because their roster's not bad, but it's not great. There's something missing, and I don't really know what it is.
Now, they don't know what it is because you have Julio Jones, you have Devonta Freeman, who, yes, every year it seems like he gets dinged up. You have a guy like Matt Ryan, who seems to be playing better with age somehow, in my opinion. You have pieces on defense to be successful, and it's showing the last 2 weeks. I think going back to the defense and trying to find the best player available for the defense is what they need to do. They've dealt with a lot of injuries in the defense, but maybe it's Okudah from Ohio State. Maybe that's a guy that makes a lot of sense for them. I think that would be a really good fit. I think they need to find ways to get the secondary better because Desmond Trufant can only do so much, but also at the same time, like he's good, but he's not great. He seems like as the time has gone on, he's starting to take steps back as far as being a number 1 corner goes. And I think Okudah could come in and be, or Okada, however the hell you say his name. And you bring him in and you have at least something to work with down the line. The Broncos, this is another team. What direction do they go? Really, I think the thing that's been holding them back this year has been quarterback. I mean, to be honest, they have the pieces on defense. Yeah, they lost Bradley Chubb. They do have Von Miller. But, like, I don't know what other direction they go other than trying to find the quarterback. And that's why I mentioned Tua because, yeah, we haven't seen Drew Lock yet, but I can tell you right now, it's not Brandon Allen. That's not their quarterback. And I don't think Joe Flacco's even going to be on this team after this season, to be honest. So I don't know what other direction they go. I mean, I don't think they've re-signed Chris Harris yet. So do they look at a cornerback? Do they look in the secondary and say, can we reshape our secondary and prepare for the future with the young pass rush that we have as far as Bradley Chubb? I have no idea. Maybe they look at a linebacker. Dylan Moses would be a fantastic fit for them. But again, I don't see what direction the Denver Broncos go outside of maybe interior offensive line. Ron Leary's an aging right guard, but they're not going to take – I don't think they're going to take a guard at that high maybe, but there's no Quentin Nelson in this draft. No offense to Tyler Biadasz or anybody else, but there's just no interior offensive lineman I think that you would take at that specific spot this early in the draft.
It may boil down to what their commitment is with Drew Lock. He was put on IR, was a thumb injury, I think, before the season even started. Now you see, Mitchell's coming in here and Brandon Allen, Brandon Allen's coming in and playing okay. So it's like, if we just get a capable quarterback in Denver, then you see kind of the potential unfold. They need another wide receiver. Emmanuel Sanders now with the San Francisco 49ers. I think this wide receiver class is way too deep for them to do that in the first round. I think there's a lot more primary needs that they need to address. Garrett Bowles has not really panned out for them. He was a guy that I was pretty high on in that draft class coming up, but his tenure in Denver. I think a lot of people are getting uneasy. It seems almost like every single quarter he has, there's a big play by Denver and it's coming back because of hands to the face, a holding call, or maybe it's just even a false start on him. And you see the potential. He's super athletic, but I think just the technique flaws and just maybe the maturity on the field, he's just not meeting the mark. He's not hitting it there with the first-round pick they invested in. So maybe this would be a potential best player available and fulfilling a need with a guy like Tristan Wirfs that has that versatility on both sides of the right tackle and left tackle. And, I always talk about, building the talent around the quarterback. So if they are committed to Drew Lock going forward, I think you look at that offensive tackle position, and then in the second, third round, maybe grab a couple wide receivers to really solidify that unit. They invested in Noah Fant a year ago in the first round, the tight end out of Iowa. He's had an okay rookie season. I know there's a lot of Denver fans and Denver media are like, well, did John Elway miss again? Because he has a streak of doing that with some of the first couple round picks in his tenure in the front office at Denver. But I think Noah Fant, we still got to be patient with him. But if I think building around whoever your quarterback may be, start up front, grab a couple wide receivers in this draft class, I think Denver's in a really good situation as long as they hit on these draft picks.
If it goes Burrow, Young, Judy, Miami, what the hell does Miami do? Let's say they take Tua just for the sake of this. Let's say Okudah goes to Falcons, and then the Broncos are sitting there. I mean, is it possibly Derek Brown? Like, would that make sense for the best player available? Because, I mean, Derek Wolfe is fine, but he's a veteran. He's an older guy. I don't know exactly where his contract is, but if you took a guy like Derek Brown and you put him on that defense with Draymond Jones, Von Miller, Myles Garrett, holy hell, man. I mean, that's a defensive front. Definitely, if Vic is still their head coach, that would be a home run. That's best player available, in my opinion, if that was the route. Maybe CeeDee Lamb as well. I think that'd be a great fit for Denver, opposite of Cortland Sutton. But then the Jets after this, I guess what would be your take on Derek Brown to the Broncos?
Oh, I think it'd make a lot of sense. I mean, you're going best player available. It depends on how Fangio wants to run that system. If he wants to stay true to that 3-4, there may be a little bit of a scheme difficulty for Brown, but I think he can play on the nose. I think he can play a little bit in that 5-tech spot if he needs to, and he's just super athletic. He's super versatile, in my opinion. Auburn moves him around just a little bit, but he really thrives at that 3-to-1 technique in Auburn's defensive alignment. But I still think he's talented and smart enough to kind of be a little bit of flexibility and play all three down. So it makes sense because I just believe in Derek Brown, the player, and Fangio. If they were to invest a top 10 pick in him, I think it would make sense.
I'm with you. And then the Jets after that, I kind of lost my train of thought because it's November the 21st and there's people blowing up fireworks right now outside. I have no idea what in the world's going on. I mean, I'm happy for Thanksgiving too, but the Jets after that, I mean, they have to find an offensive lineman. They have to. If Tristan Wirfs is there, they have to consider him. Maybe even Tyler Biadasz at that point. I know it's like a spot in front of the Broncos, or a spot behind the Broncos, but like at that point, like they need to find ways to protect Sam Darnold because his offensive line is terrible. And I know he operates better outside of the pocket when he has to improvise a little bit, but that offensive line, I've watched actually quite a bit of the Jets this year, just because I'm intrigued by the development of Sam Darnold, and I don't like Adam Gase. I don't think he's the guy for them, but I think that they need to find an offensive line that's doable because if they don't, it's going to end up hurting, Le'Veon Bell, their investment, as well as Sam Darnold. But I mean, nothing against Chuma Edoga. I really liked him coming out. I thought he was going to be a nice find. I think he's still going to be okay, but he got his ass kicked against Ryan Kerrigan over the weekend. And just outside of that, they don't have anything else up front. So I think Wirfs would be a home run for the Jets. And then maybe something on defense if they can find a way to get the defense going and getting them in the right spots to keep Jamal Adams happy. But I don't even know if Jamal Adams is going to be on this team in the future.
I think there's a lot more questions outside of really roster spots before we can really analyze what the Jets want to do because is Adam Gase your guy long-term? everybody knew he wasn't when he was hired, but except the Jets.
Yeah.
They saw something in him for a very struggling Miami team in the front office, on the field. It just didn't make a lot of sense. And Adam Gase comes in as supposedly going to be, a match made in heaven with the relationship between he and Sam Darnold. I don't understand. So I think there's a lot more questions before we can even pinpoint what they need on the field. I agree with you 100% on offensive line, especially if Tristan Wirfs is available. And who knows what's too high for Austin Jackson. I know you like him a lot.
Yeah.
10, but I think just his physical style of play, like you plug him in right now for New York, and I bet you he does every bit as good as some of those other guys on that starting offensive line. So maybe he's a guy, but I think there's some really solid offensive line play this year in this draft class. I think Thomas and Wirfs are probably the only two guys that you can make a legitimate case as being top 10 guys. But I think from that 20 to about 40 range, I think there's a lot of potential, a lot of physical traits that, if you can get them in your system and mold them into the player you want to be, I think you could really get a lot of value. So a pretty deep offensive tackle class, but I think it's just maybe a little top heavy just based on those two guys. But again, just going back to make it come in full circle for the New York Jets, I think there's a lot more questions maybe internally that we don't know about that need to get answered before they even commit to anybody on this team.
Austin Jackson, that's pretty early. I know you talked about that, but that's pretty early, but I don't think it's out of the question. I don't think it's out of the question for him to be top 15, top 20. Cleveland is a team that I would continue to circle back around, at 14 or 15. I think that would be an ideal landing spot. Miami, they have Pittsburgh's first-round pick. They would be picking, I think, right now at 16. They also have Houston's first-round pick, and that's in the 20s. So Austin Jackson could be a fit for either Miami, Cleveland. I think those would be two great landing spots for him. But, the next three teams, Tampa Bay, Arizona, and Detroit, that's 8, 9, and 10. I'll just say real fast on Detroit, they need to go defense, and they do not need to draft a quarterback. They with Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, they don't have time to draft a quarterback and wait for the future. They have to win now. They have to, because they have been so bad these last 2 years. And they said personally 9-7 is not good enough for this organization. And that's why they got rid of Jim Caldwell. Well, I'll tell you right now, I take 9-7 all day, because this crap right now that I'm seeing is not any good. But they have to win now. They have to go defense. They have the worst defense I think I've ever seen in my life. And I've seen this team 0-16. It's bad. But they need to win now. They need to put all the chips on the table. But with that being said, 8, 9, and 10, I think if Tua is on the board with Miami, if let's say Miami just doesn't take Tua at 4 or 5, wherever they're at, they take, if Andrew Thomas is there, or they take Derek Brown to pair up with Christian Wilkins, or whatever it may be, I think at that point they could take either 15 or 16, whatever Pittsburgh's pick is, or whatever Houston's pick is in the 20s. Take that pick with some of the other ammunition that they have in this year's draft and in future drafts, move up to 8, 9, or 10, and then draft Tua. And if I'm a Lions fan, which I am, but if I'm the Lions and I'm sitting at 10 and Miami calls me, and I only say the Lions because Brian Flores worked with the Patriots, Bob Quinn, Patriots, Matt Patricia, Patriots. There's a lot of ties there. So if that's the case, you go out and you say, and I'll leave 8 and 9 for Tampa Bay and Arizona to you, but with the Lions, go out, and I'm living maybe in fantasy land because they're not going to do this. They're not going to trade out of this pick, but trade out of the pick, move back, and if you got into the mid-teens, maybe you can get Dylan Moses, but you can also get extra picks, because Bob Quinn's going to need as many lottery tickets as he can possibly get, because they have to win now and this coming season. And if they don't win this upcoming season, and I'm talking next year, they're done. Matt Patricia's going to get fired. Bob Quinn's going to get fired. Matt Stafford's probably going to get traded. The whole thing's going to come crumbling down. And if I'm Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia, I'm not thinking about the next guy that's going to possibly take my job. That's why I can't take a quarterback. I got to think about now. I got to try to win my division, get in the playoffs, do something to prove that I know what I'm doing, because right now they have no idea what they're doing whatsoever. But that's just my take on Detroit. They've got to go defense in this draft, whether they're picking at 10, whether they win a couple more games and pick 14th, it doesn't matter. But they're not making the playoffs. They're going to have a high draft pick, or at least a relatively high draft pick. They need to go defense. But Tampa Bay, Arizona, I'll leave those two teams for you, and then we'll get a quick rundown on the games this weekend, and we'll get the hell out of here.
I think with Tampa Bay, we'll know pretty soon if they are 100% committed to Jameis Winston going forward.
They're
but
not.
I think I don't think they should be, because there's talk about, will he possibly be tagged? And I'm like, no, that's a waste of money, because you're just going to be stuck in the rut of him, sure, throwing for, 4,000 yards, whatever it may be, and maybe, 20-something touchdowns, but he's still going to match that with, a little more interceptions, because he just puts that team in really bad situations. Ronald Jones seems like he's slowly improving every single week. Chris Godwin's been a nice, come up in that offense. Mike Evans, if he can just have a consistent quarterback play, I think you're looking at one of the better wide receivers in the league. When they gave Donovan Smith a new contract this offseason, or franchise tag, I don't even remember what they did, but they committed to him. I was not on board with that. I get it. You had to figure out something for this season to see what you have in Jameis Winston's contract year. I think they should address that left tackle position, whoever that may be. We've just listed off all the left tackles that could be possibly available in that realm, in that top 10 range. But I also think they definitely need to consider the cornerback position, because they just recently cut Vernon Hargreaves. Carlton Davis, second-round pick from a couple years ago. He's been okay. He's been a little held back because of injuries. But even though I think his floor may be just the number 3 corner, I think his ceiling is just right there at the number 2. I don't think he's really going to take that next step forward, even though he is 6'1" and some change. He has that long physical style of play. But I think, kind of find that versatile cornerback that can play in the slot, that can play in the boundary. I think that's Jeff Okudah here. I think that would make plenty of sense for them, finding that true cornerback number 1 that they've been searching for a handful of years. And Vernon Hargreaves, he started out okay his rookie year. It just seems like he took a step backwards every single year until they cut him just a few weeks ago. So I think cornerback or offensive tackle make a lot of sense here. Arizona, I think you can also look at offensive tackle. If you're not sold going forward with DJ Humphries, he's been kind of a guy that I scratched my head that was drafted in the first round to begin with out of Florida. So I think you could probably look at the left tackle position. I don't know the David Johnson situation. Is he going to be traded in the offseason? Is he 100% committed? Is Arizona committed to him? Obviously, I don't think they're going to go running back. There's not a running back in this class that is worthy of going that high. So maybe, in the second or third round, you could look in that direction. But I also think they need to maybe capitalize on that defensive line. We were just talking about Derek Brown potentially being in that Broncos defensive unit, even though Arizona also runs a 3-4. I think Derek Brown would be a best player available situation, would add a lot of impact and an instant impact for an Arizona defense that shows some capabilities, but they're still looking from some true core units to partner with Chandler Jones. So I think Derek Brown here, the Arizona Cardinals, would make a lot of sense too.
You know what I can't wait for? I can't wait for CeeDee Lamb to fall in the draft somehow. The Lions sit there at 10. CeeDee Lamb gets to like 11 or 12, just like OBJ, and the Lions freaking pass on him because they don't need a wide receiver because they have Kenny Golladay and everything else, and Marvin Jones, which if I'm them, I'm just going to draft CeeDee. Whatever. Who cares? The Lions suck, man. But no, I think
you need a podcast alone, just like to be like Lions Rant podcast. And I'm sure a lot of people would love it because everything you say you'd be ranting, but all of it is 100% valid.
Well, no, like I've considered it multiple times, but like I try not to talk about the Lions as much as I want to, but I try to leave my fandom out of it, and I try not to cover the team that I root for on Sundays because that only leads to bad things. But I've considered a podcast multiple times called Same Old Lions Podcast, the Same Old Lions Podcast, the SOL Podcast, and I've considered it multiple freaking times. And I cannot stand this organization. But I will tell you this, if I'm Tampa Bay, I'm moving on from Jameis Winston the moment he put up a W and shoved it in his mouth. That's the moment I would have moved on from him. He would have never played another snap for me. But Week 13 college football, and folks, yeah, that's just kind of something we were considering the last couple of weeks. We wanted to take a look at the top 10, but we didn't want to jump the gun too soon because, yeah, mock drafts are fun and everything, but we wanted to wait and see really who the bad teams were in the NFL. And I think we're starting to really see it take shape with the top 10, top 12 teams in the league. But college football, week 13, not a ton of great games. Penn State, Ohio State is certainly the game. I don't know why it's a 12 o'clock game. I don't know how this isn't like a 7:30 game, 8 o'clock game, but it is what it is. This is a big game for the Big Ten because really the winner of this probably has a shot of being in the Big Ten championship game. I think we're all expecting Ohio State to win. I think Penn State, they're going to have to score 35, 40 points to win this game. They're not going to do it. They didn't do it against Minnesota. They're not going to do it in this one. But what are we expecting? First game back for Chase Young. I think he's going to be a man on a mission. Rob Windsor, defensive tackle out of Penn State. He's a player to watch. He's simply because he's going to the Senior Bowl. He's accepted his invite. Yetur Gross-Matos from Penn State as well. I don't know if there's anybody else outside of maybe KJ Hamler. I don't know. Penn State I don't think is that good. I've never really bought into them this year, so I'm not buying them this week.
Yeah, I think just kind of going off and piggybacking off the prospects, I think like you're saying with Penn State's dynamic wide receiving core, Sean Wade, Jeff Okudah. We talked about Okudah just briefly there for a little bit, talking about Tampa Bay in the draft. But Wade's another guy that he's had, I forget the article, I think it was called the Lantern or the Lector, something like that. That an article of him, talking about last year's Penn State game, about how he got beat a couple of times and the big 85-yard touchdown that kind of opened up that game. But he was kind of talking about, it's like, I want everybody to play. I want the best of the best from Penn State. So they got a little bit of the rivalry chalkboard material, so that'll definitely be fun. But you're talking about Gross-Matos, who I think's had an incredible season. In the preseason, I wrote about, I think he came in around 24, 25 for me. And I wrote about him talking about he has all the physical and athletic ability, and that's the intrigue. But he still needed to mature a little bit as far as his pass rushing elements go. And I think he's definitely done that. He's shown a little bit. I think you commented on Twitter the other day about like a push-pull technique that he had. He's very patient, but he's very skilled with his upper body. So he's putting all the pieces together to really kind of ease his way up into some of those upper echelon pass rushers in this draft class. He goes up against left tackle Thayer Munford, the big offensive tackle, left tackle from Ohio State, 6'6", 310 junior, the lone returning starter from this offensive line unit from Ohio State a year ago. Super athletic. He's a very patient pass protector. I was watching him a little bit this afternoon, and I think this will be a really good matchup to see. Can he stay on par with some of those quick upper body movements that Gross-Matos offers? So I think there will be definitely a trench battle. You talked about Windsor inside for Penn State as well, going to the Senior Bowl. So definitely a lot of really good one-on-one matchups between Penn State and Ohio State, because like you said, I'm kind of to the belief where I think Ohio State, the closest this thing gets from a first final score perspective, maybe about 14 points in my opinion. But I think the floodgates open to Ohio State. I think this is the week that college football really says, hey, Ohio State's the best team in college football. I know LSU, their resume is a lot more impressive, but their defense had a lot of questions to answer. Just from an overall perspective, I think Ohio State, this is when they assert their ability to be the number one team in college football with a big win here over Penn State.
Justin Fields has 31 touchdowns to 1 interception. That is effing ridiculous.
But it's funny, like nobody's really talking about that.
No, and honestly, nobody's talking about their run game at all. I know we're talking quarterback play, but nobody's talking about their run game either. Like J.K. Dobbins, 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns, approaching 1,300 yards, probably going to have over 1,500 rushing yards, and nobody's really going to talk about him. He could be in the Heisman candidate talk, but nobody's going to talk about it. Master Teague, first of all, great freaking name. Freshman.
Absolutely.
Yeah, freshman on pace for 1,000 yards himself, and Justin Fields has 10 rushing touchdowns on top of everything he's done. So, like, Ohio State, bar none, is just so talented. I would be incredibly shocked if this game was like 28-24. And if that's the case, if you better be rooting for Penn State, because if it's 28-24, I will buy you a nice steak dinner in Mobile at the Senior Bowl, and we'll do it big. But another name as well, Malik Harrison, linebacker for Ohio State. He's a senior, 6'3", 240. He's their leading tackler. I think he flashes a nice bit of range, at times over pursues, can miss a couple of tackles. I don't think he's a great coverage guy, but with that size and the limit, the range that he has, I think he's worth watching as well, because he'll have his hands full with Journey Brown, the running back out of Penn State, as well as KJ Hamler, who will do plenty after the catch. So it'll be a good game. We'll see exactly how it goes down. I think we are expecting, like we said, Ohio State to win and really setting up the big game against Michigan in 2 weeks. Michigan, Indiana, I think this is kind of a trap game. I don't think we need to go into a ton of prospects, but I think it's a trap game. Maybe Michigan blows them out, but it wouldn't surprise me if Indiana plays it close and maybe puts Michigan on upset alert possibly. Other than that, I mean, Oregon at Arizona State, Justin Herbert on the road. We'll see what he does at Sun Devil Stadium. Utah at Arizona. It's interesting that the two teams in the Pac-12 that will probably be competing for the Pac-12 championship game are in Arizona this week, just miles away. So I'm intrigued by just the Pac-12 right now, because at Alabama at 5 in the college football playoff with no Tua, I'm wondering if one of those Pac-12 teams, if they get, one loss with the Pac-12 title, would they put one of those teams in before Alabama? We'll see how that – I mean, what's your take on that? Do you think that will happen?
There's so many scenarios to play with because it depends. LSU and Georgia are going to be in the SEC championship. Well, what if somehow Georgia was able to put it all together on both sides of the ball and they beat LSU? LSU, obviously, deservedly, in my opinion, should still be in the playoffs. So you have Georgia in there, you have LSU in there, you have Clemson in there, and you have Ohio State in there. So that means the Pac-12 champion, in my opinion, would be left out. But the difference is Alabama will not have the same resume as an LSU if they were to lose one game. So I'm to the belief where Alabama is going to be the one left out, because you can't control your conference schedule. And this is why it irks me when it constantly comes up. It's like, well, strength of schedule, this, that, and the other. I'm like, well, Oregon can't help the rotation of their schedule. They can't go and recruit for UCLA. They're not going to go recruit for Stanford just to be like, well, this is going to help our resume. They played Auburn in the first game of the year. Sure, Auburn hasn't really amounted to be anything special, but it's still one of the top half of the SEC teams, which is supposed to be the greatest conference in college football. So they've gone out of their way to make their schedule a little difficult, and surely they're not going to get shamed for it. But at the end of the day, I think they'll if they win this weekend, they beat Arizona State, who I think in the open, just overall view of the committee, I think they think highly of. Then they just keep climbing the rungs of the ladder, beat Utah. I think it'll work itself out where Oregon would find themselves in there. Utah, I'm not 100% confident they will, just based on their loss.
Oh, they will.
But
they will.
I'm not confident that they would be in the 4, even though you want them to be.
That's
if
bullshit.
They were to run the table. But it does help that I believe now USC is in the top 25, so that definitely helps bolster their resume. But it will work itself out. But I do think, even though there is this bias that is very believable, you could have a strong theory with the SEC and the committee, I still think Alabama is on the outside looking in.
I just want to say that I'm a proud Utah Ute fan. I want LSU. Bring me Joe Burrow in the college football playoff, 1 versus 4. Let's do the damn thing. That's all I'm going to say. As a Utah Ute, as an adopted Ute of Utah. But
I love it.
Some other games, and I'm just looking at it from a quarterback perspective. You have Jalen Hurts versus TCU. You have Jacob Eason against Colorado at Colorado. You have Jordan Love at home against Boise State, bringing in Curtis Weaver with 12.5 sacks, who could be a borderline first-round guy. Maybe he is a first-round guy to some people. I wouldn't really have a problem putting him in there, to be honest. If Marcus Davenport can go, and I know Davenport's, I think, definitely a little bit more superior, but he kind of reminds me of Marcus Davenport in a way. So if Curtis Weaver or if Davenport can get in there, I think Curtis Weaver could get in there down the line when we get closer to the draft as a first-round caliber player. But Jordan Love as well. Out of those, Jalen Hurts versus TCU, Eason versus Colorado, Love versus Boise State, which of those quarterbacks are you most interested in watching on Saturday?
I still want to find that maybe 1 to 2 pieces of Jordan Love's play that puts me on the bandwagon and be like, this guy can succeed in the NFL.
Right.
I'm looking for it. And I think Boise State has enough talent on defense for people to believe, including myself, to convince me like, yes, he's the real deal. Now, I'm not saying if he has just an okay game that I'm going to write him off completely. No, I don't believe one game makes you or makes your entire career, makes your entire potential. But I think if he plays a solid game, start to finish, against a very strong Boise State team, I think the best group of 5 team, second or third, maybe first or second best group of 5 team in college football. That says enough, I think, about Jordan Love. He would convince me because I know he has the physical talent. I mean, he's a highlight reel, but I think it's some of the consistency, just those layup passes, 10 to 15 yards, just to continue to sustain drives. I think that's what he struggles in, at least in my opinion. So if he can answer the call in this game, I think I may be not on the bandwagon of saying there's a crowd out there that says he could be in that, top 20 to 32 range for a team to trade up for or just take a flyer on, which I don't agree with that. But maybe he can convince me here that he's worth a top 75 pick.
Very, very much in the cards. I think it's going to be a really good game. Jacob Eason on the road at Colorado. I'm not too worried about that game. I don't think Colorado's great. They do have some players on their defense that's definitely worth checking out. I know one of them is going to the Senior Bowl. He's accepted his invite. That's Davian Taylor, a JUCO transfer that's come onto this team. He's actually got a really good physical build, but he's just kind of a tweener, drops into coverage a lot. I kind of question his coverage ability. He just doesn't seem to be too instinctive. So he's kind of like a tweener. Like, do you put him in the box to stop the run and rush the passer? Do you drop him into coverage and hope you get lucky? I mean, he's playing a lot of slot receivers and stuff because it's the Pac-12. He's not playing a ton of tight ends, so it might be a little different. But then they've got Nate Landman, their linebacker, that has the whole washboard neck thing like Leighton Vander Esch did. So he's a beast, man. He's got a tremendous amount of upside to his game. He's got a knack for getting to the football. So I'm curious, what he does against Jacob Eason. But the other game as well, Washington State at home against Oregon State. Oregon State brings in Isaiah Hodgins, 6'4" receiver. He does a really good job at the catch point, really good body control, fluid athlete, especially after the catch. And then you've got Anthony Gordon Ramsey. That's right, Anthony Gordon Ramsey, like Gordon Ramsay.
Oh, what a name.
Well, no, his name's Anthony Gordon, but I add Ramsey on there. So, kind of like a nickname.
I thought that was like his hyphenated name.
Oh, dude, if his name was Anthony Gordon Ramsey, that'd be unreal.
But my hopes up.
Yeah, I know. But anyways, he's a Senior Bowl possible quarterback. More than likely, Jim Nagy put me on blast already this week about it. So I think that'll probably end up happening, Anthony Gordon from Washington State. But he put some serious zip on the ball. I have a short thread on my Twitter page if you guys want to check him out. He's definitely going to be worth checking out this weekend. It's on the Pac-12 network, though, so I don't know how many people will watch that. But I will say about Jalen Hurts, props to him bringing Oklahoma back last week, down 28-3, shout out Falcons, down 28-3 without CeeDee Lamb. He's approaching 1,000 rushing yards this year. He's doing, I think, one hell of a job for his draft stock. I think he went from being undrafted to draftable. We'll discuss at a later date of exactly where we view him as a prospect. Is he a top 50 guy? I think he is. But there's plenty to like about Jalen Hurts. And if CeeDee Lamb does not play against Jeff Gladney from TCU this week, how will Jalen Hurts respond another week without Lamb? It's going to be a lot of fun to watch that game. I'm excited for it. I think you said Gladney's not playing this week, right?
Well, he's out for the first half. So he had a targeting penalty last week versus Texas Tech. So, depending on CeeDee Lamb and his status, I think he's just listed as questionable coming into this game. So there could be a possibility because Gladney kind of plays that island role and that one-on-one role for TCU. Kind of plays just that man-on-man, not necessarily all the help over the top. So that would be very specific to CeeDee Lamb. So that could be really the difference maker. I mean, sure, Lamb's probably not going to be 100% either way, but we know just even 75% of his ability is better than probably 3/5 or 3/4 of college football receivers. So definitely a matchup you got to circle. But yeah, just real quickly talking about Jalen Hurts, I've said it maybe a few weeks ago. If there's a role in the NFL for Dak Prescott, and we're seeing how successful he can be right now for Dallas, Jalen Hurts definitely has a place.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. That's a great point. And I wasn't a huge Dak guy coming out.
I wasn't either. Not at all.
He's proven me wrong. He's proven you wrong. He's proven a lot of people wrong. I think Jalen Hurts is going to do the same thing. He's a great character guy. I think he's going to be I think he's going to be fine at the next level. And it wouldn't surprise me, like some of the teams what we talked about in the kind of the mock draft discussion, if you will, earlier in the show, or for the Tua discussion, I guess, landing spots in the first round. It wouldn't surprise me if some of those teams that we talked about circle back to Jalen Hurts at some point in this draft, and maybe it's not so much in the first round, or maybe it is, but I think plenty of teams will do their homework on him, and I think he's going to surprise a lot of people by the time we get to April. And I will say one last thing, and then we'll get out of here. On Colorado's game against Washington, Aaron Fuller, Miles Bryant, two names to know for Washington. Miles Bryant, defensive back. He's an aggressive little guy that he's not even that little, but he's an undersized defensive back, kind of like Budda Baker was for them, a poor man's Budda, if you will. But Aaron Fuller, I think actually Aaron Fuller's hurt, so I'm not going to check on that. But if he is playing, check him out. But for Colorado, they've got two receivers. We've talked about one plenty of times. I'm going to butcher the name. We all know that. Laviska, Shenault, whatever.
I think you nailed it.
I probably did not, but thank you for the support. He's turning into having a good year, especially if he can be healthy. He's got a lot of upside. I don't know if he's going to go in the first round anymore, but another guy to watch for them is Tony Brown, wide receiver. I watched him a couple weeks ago. He's a senior. He's 6'1", 195. He's every bit of 6'1", 195 too. 51 receptions, 650 in reception yards and 5 touchdowns. He's had a big year with a garbage quarterback in Steven Montez. I think he's worth noting in this game, and I think he could be a bit under the radar and maybe a future Senior Bowl guy as well. So keep an eye on Tony Brown, wide receiver number 18. So yeah, pay attention to him. But outside of that, dude, that's week 13. We just got into a ton of stuff. Tua, the top or the 10 worst teams in football, so much more that we could get into. We could do this for hours, but I think we hit everything that we needed to. We'll discuss a plan for next week. Maybe we'll do a show, maybe not. If we do, great. If we don't, have a great Thanksgiving. You guys, of course, can follow us on Twitter @_Christian Page, @Russ NFL Draft. Be sure to rate, subscribe, review, share the podcast as much as you possibly can. We can't do it without your guys' support. So the more you support us, the more episodes we're able to bring you. So outside of that, CP, enjoy the weekend, my man. We will talk next week. Until next time, this is Cover One, the NFL Draft Podcast.